What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the third-person and action RPG tutorial series, we are going to be going over NPC interactions, part 3. In the previous episode of NPC interactions, we had made a little dialogue choice menu that would pop up here, and we could select our choice and make the others fade away. That was happening as soon as we entered the level, just as proof of concept, but now we actually want to tie it to our NPC interaction, which is what we're going to do in today's episode. So we speak to the NPC, dialogue comes up, I can make my choice. Then we can exit interaction with the NPC, go about our business, return to the NPC, and interact with them again for another dialogue choice. When you interact with an NPC, you want to immediately be greeted by a dialogue choice menu. You would probably have the NPC say some dialogue to you first, and then you would pick, but we need to get that dialogue flow down. Regardless, as long as we can spawn this widget through code when we choose, we will be able to accomplish that in the future, and that's what we're going to be doing in today's episode. So for those of you that want to get caught up in the series, I recommend checking out this playlist in the top right corner, where you can see every single episode we've done, from locking onto targets, attacking enemies, and adding weapons to our inventory. Alternatively, if you don't care about the whole series and just care about NPCs, I do recommend you watch the first episode and the previous episodes of the NPC interaction and NPC system, because we are going to be building on top of that logic today, so if you're familiar with the previous episodes, this will be a lot easier and make more sense. I'll link that in the top right corner right here. With all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We are going to be doing everything in the code today, and we're actually going to be cleaning up a little bit of blueprint. So we're not adding any more logic, but we are going to remove some logic from blueprint, which is going to make our lives better and our project easier to read. First things first, let's remove the level blueprint logic we added in the previous NPC interaction episode. So in Unreal Engine 5, you have this little graph here. You click on that and go to Open Level Blueprint. In Unreal Engine 4, there will be a button that says Blueprint right around this area. You click on that and go to Open Level Blueprint. Once it opens up here, we had our event begin play, and in the previous episode, we were creating a widget of dialogue choice menu type, and we were adding it to our viewport. But we don't want to just do this now. When we come in to this level for the first time, we don't want to spawn dialogue by default. And so I'm going to remove these two nodes. Everything that was in here before, which was technically just cutscene logic and not related to the actual series that we have here, is still going to be here. I just removed the logic for the NPC interactions. So now you should not spawn that menu anymore when you open up this level, which is good. Additionally, there's one other thing I wanted to cover in Blueprint specifically, and that is if we go to our character blueprint, for me it's base character BP. If we go to the event graph, we had some interaction logic that we had temporarily disabled right here. And in the previous episodes of the NPC behavior, we had done this behavior in the code, and I want to keep that logic in the code. So we disabled this, and I showed us disabling it previously the NPC episodes, but we never removed it. I'm going to remove it now. I'm just letting you guys know before I do that. I'm completely removing that from this blueprint. So there we go. We've cleaned up two things in Blueprint, and the rest of this episode is going to be in the code. So I'm going to close out of this and go to Visual Studio. So here we are in the code for the project, and I want to go to my base NPC.h. In here, we want to add the widget that we want to create when interacting with the NPC, as well as a method of creating that widget. Before this episode, everything we did in the series with widgets was done in Blueprint. We're going to move some of that to code now. So now we're going to be creating our dialogue choice menu from the code. So let's scroll down to our variables, and for me, I go down to the very bottom here, and I have this new variable. So this variable, T subclass of UUserWidget, and I'm calling it dialogue choice class. So T subclass of means this variable is going to be a type of class that is UUserWidget or lower. UUserWidget is the type of widget that all of our widgets are in this project. And so when you create a widget in Unreal Engine, you have the ability to pick the parent class. We usually just pick the default, which is UUserWidget. So the children we've made, our HUD, the dialogue choice menu, the main menu, these are all children of UUserWidget. In other words, they are a subclass of UUserWidget. So T subclass of means we are going to have a class of this type or lower. In this case, I want to pick this as our dialogue choice class. A, it allows us to know what widget we are going to spawn, but B, we could actually change dialogue choice widget that we are spawning depending on the NPC, because this is in the base NPC. For example, if we wanted some alien creature to have a different type of dialogue choice menu, we could do that. We have the ability to do that based on the type of NPC. I've made this U property so we can set it in the blueprint. So I have U property of edit anywhere and blueprint read write, which is going to allow us to access it and edit it within the blueprint. I've given it the category of dialogue. And then I set this meta tag on it. Meta equals allow private access equals true, because I did put this in the private scope. So only this class right here can access it. Now we can have setters and getters for this later, and we may move it into protected if we have a reason to do that for the children classes, but I just made it private. Wherever you want to put it is fine. You don't have to follow this directly, but this is how I'm doing it for now. Additionally, I have added a function in here. So I've added a new function for today's episode called trigger dialogue choice. And what this is going to do is create the dialogue choice pop-up, and will technically handle any behavior for that as well. So if there's something else specifically with the menu that we need to do, we can handle it in this function. Now, I didn't make it a U function. It's not blueprint callable or anything. I just need to be able to call it from the code today, but there's a very good chance you're going to want to trigger dialogue from something in Blueprint, so you may want to add it. As always, we can add it later. It's very quick and very easy to do. As you can see, it's just void trigger dialogue choice, and that's it. Once we have that set up, we can go to the base npc.cpp. Now, I didn't actually assign a default value for my dialogue choice widget. You could technically assign one if you want. I'm actually not going to assign one, because if I want to have an NPC that can never be spoken to, or they don't have dialogue choices, we can just kind of speak to them in passing. We don't need a class for the dialogue, in which case that's less data that we need to keep track of. And I'm actually going to check to see if it's empty before using it, so we can leave it just like this. We don't have to set a default value for it. Now we're in base npc.cpp. Let's scroll down and go to where we want to make this function. So I'm going down to the very bottom, and I'm making my new function, void a base npc, : trigger dialogue choice. In here, what I want to do is check to see if my dialogue choice class variable has a default object. This is what I was talking about earlier. So get default object is essentially a null check in this case. If you see the comment here, it says it gets the CDO, the class default object, if we are referencing a valid class. So it returns the CDO, or null if the class is null. So if the class is null, we're going to return null, which means this if statement would not succeed. But if we did assign a value to this variable, and it is a proper class, then we will go into the if statement. So if dialogue choice class.get default object, and that means if there's a dialogue choice class for this NPC. If there is, we want to go ahead and create that widget. To be able to do this line, we need to include a specific header file. We can't just call create widget. Create widget is under this include, blueprint/widgettree.h. So I'm keeping all my includes in my base npc.h right now. It's not technically required. You could definitely put it in your CPP, but I've just been following the way I did the rest of the includes for the NPC class so far. So I have include blueprint/widgettree.h. Make sure you put it above your generated.h, because that has to be the bottom include in Unreal. Now let's go back to base npc.cpp, and let's add this line here. If uUserWidget pointer dialog widget equals create widget uUserWidget get world dialog choice class. Let's go over this. Create widget is the function that we're used to using when we're spawning a widget from Blueprint. We've never done it from code, but it's the same function call. So we have create widget, and this time we have to determine what type of widget right here. I wasn't any more specific in this one. I just used uUserWidget. You could actually pass it the direct class if you had it in here. It's not required, and since I'm just using my dialog choice class here, using the standard uUserWidget will work perfectly fine here. Then we have our parentheses, so we had angle brackets for the user widget, and then we have parentheses for the parameters in create widget. The first one, you can see it says uWorld owning object, so whatever owns this widget. You could definitely assign it to the first player controller like we do a lot of the time in Blueprint. Right now I'm just setting it to get world. If you wanted to assign it to the player controller, you could get world get first player controller, and that would also work. This is safe, and it will actually assign it to the user that is interacting with the NPC, assuming this is a single player game like it is here. We'll get more complicated in multiplayer. But it's up to you. You can just use getWorld. That's essentially the same as not assigning an owner, which is also fine. You don't have to assign an owner to a widget. The other parameter is this T subclass of user widget class. And so in this case, our user widget class is the dialog choice class. That's what we made that variable out to be. So whatever class we have in this variable is the type that we want to spawn when creating the widget. Then this part right here is just creating a user widget pointer and setting it equal to the created widget, because create widget returns the widget that it created. If it returns null, that means no widget was created with it, and so we won't go into this if statement. However, if the widget was created, it will succeed and we will go inside of it. Before we continue here, if you try and build now, your create widget likely won't work again, even though you have the include in the base npc.h. For that, we have to go to the third-person tutorial.build.cs, or basically your project name.build.cs. If you look in your source folder here, where all your code is, you should have a C# file titled projectname.build.cs. Open that up. We have this public dependency module names, and we have this add range call. So we're adding all these modules for use in our code. All of these are default. I did not add them. But if we want to start dealing with widgets in Unreal Engine, in the code, we have to add this UMG module. So add a comma after whatever your last element is in your public dependency module names and add quote UMG quote. Once you do this, it will add extra modules, and then we will be able to access those things like create widget, which we weren't able to do before. Now going back to base npc.cpp, this should now compile, and we will be able to add the widget to the viewport. Just like in Blueprint, once we create the widget, it exists, but to display it to the user, we have to call add to viewport. Since we're in this if statement, we know the dialog widget was created successfully, so we can go ahead and call dialog widget add to viewport. Additionally, you can pass in a Z order just like you can in Blueprint, but it's not required. We don't have any other widgets that are going to be over top of this right now. Leaving it at 0 is perfectly fine. Now, once you have this function set up, we have to call the function, and again, we don't have everything in place we want to really call it at the proper time, but the closest time we can do right now is the enter interaction function. So I go to my enter interaction where we start interacting with the NPC. As long as there is an instigator, so a character that actually triggered this enter interaction, I am triggering the dialog choice here. You could make this work in multiplayer right now. So you see how I'm calling it here? If the instigator is valid, if we move this function call into this other if statement, where we check to see if there is an instigator controller, and we are to pass in the instigator controller, we can set the instigator controller as the owner of the widget. That will allow whoever interacted with this NPC to be the owner of the widget. So if we go to trigger dialog choice and add a player controller pointer, I'm just going to call it, we'll call it instigator controller, and then I take this parameter and I go back to the CPP file and add it as a variable here in the function. Instead of using get world get first player controller, we can now pass in instigator controller. Now to do this, we do need to make sure that instigator controller is valid. It should be valid because in enter interaction, we do check to make sure it is valid before calling anything on it, and we're only calling the function within that. Just keep it in mind if you are doing it this way, this controller does need to be valid. Now in trigger dialog choice, we can pass in instigator controller. At this point, we can go ahead and launch the game again. The editor is back open. We want to make sure we set our dialog class widget on all of our NPCs. So I'm going to go to my blueprints, my NPCs, my NPC Paladin BP. You can go to all your NPCs and go to the class defaults. You can either scroll down through them or search for it. I want to search for not NPC, I want to search for dialogue, and that will be enough. And then here is my dialogue class. So I want to select the proper class, which for me is the dialogue choice widget, or dialogue choice menu it's called in here. Select that, and then we'll be good to go. So we can go ahead and launch this, and this should work, just as you saw at the start of the episode with our new changes. It's actually just a little bit better now. So if we go over to our NPC and interact, you can see the widget was created, and we should be the owner of this widget. We can make our choice, we can exit interaction, and life is good. So I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and it lets me know you guys are interested in seeing this type of content. If you want to support the channel and myself further, you can check out the Patreon, YouTube membership, and Discord subscriptions to gain extra benefits and support me along the way. If you ran into any problems while following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community and I would be happy to help you. Anyway guys, that's all I got for you, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.